chapter, three words that we should always keep in mind: observation, interpretation, and application. And I guess that's like critical listening and information listening and emphatic listening. Is that right, sister? Uh, I don't want to steal your sermon, but but three things we keep in mind: observation, interpretation, and application. What does the Bible say? What does it mean? And how can I apply it to my life? What does it say? What does it mean? And how can I apply it to my life? If you don't have those three things in your concept, you may not get what God wants you to get, because you got to read it. That's observation. What does it say? Interpretation. What does it mean? You got to study it in its context. Then once you read it and study it, then the next thing is, how do I apply it? Paul said in Philippians, those things that you've heard, you learned, you received in me, put into practice. So if you don't put it into practice, and that's the concept of that's why Christians were called Christians, because they were looking like Christ. They had put into practice Christ's life. So Joshua chapter 18, we're at the point now where I did this at noonday, by the way. Welcome all our listeners at Facebook and YouTube. Joshua 18 starts with the remaining land that had not been divided. We had the Judah had gotten their land. Ephraim and Manasseh had gotten their land. There was three tribes, and there, of course, 2.5 tribes still on the other side. So essentially, 7 tribes had not gotten their land. And so we began after about 7 or 8 years in the promised land. If I go back a few years, it took them from leaving Egypt to Mount Sinai was about 2 years. And then after they got the law at Mount Sinai, they went to Kadesh Barnea. And that's when the 12 spies went out. 10 came back with bad report. And so what God did, had them to wander in the wilderness for 38 years. So they were 2 years at the foot of the mountain and 38 years wandering in the wilderness. And that's when we got to 40 years. After that, Moses died. They went over to the promised land. And for 7 years, they've been fighting to conquer the promised land. Now, after about 7 years, they should have gotten the land that God wanted them to get. So we said this Sunday, by the way, Manasseh was the oldest child, but who got the blessing? Ephraim got the blessing, didn't it? Even though Manasseh was the oldest child, Ephraim got the blessing, because we call that Sunday, the second birth blessing. The second birth blessing. That is that if Jacob was the youngest child, and Esau was the oldest child, but who got the blessing? Jacob. Manasseh was the oldest child, and Ephraim the youngest child. Who got the blessing? Right. And so the second birth. So when we are born, physically, your age, whatever your age is, when you were born, that's not the blessed time. The blessed time is when what? You've been born again. That's the second blessing. Your birthday, physical birthday, is good, but that's not where your blessings come from. Your blessings come from when you were born again, whenever that is. So that's the second birth blessing. And that's the concept in the Old Testament, and it follows through. That's why Jesus said to Nicodemus, you must be born again, the second birth. And so there may be people who are not born again, and they are not really enjoying the second birth blessings. They're enjoying the blessings of their life now. But until you're born again, you don't get the second birth blessings. And so you must be born again. If not, then of course it doesn't work, so to speak. I hope I hope when I won't say that. I saw a picture of who was it? Um, Nefertia and Miss Ty in Mexico enjoying themselves. So I think at noonday, I think they tuned in, I believe. So I hope they tune in today. I want to say something. But chapter 18, verse 1 of Joshua. Then the whole congregation of the sons of Israel assembled themselves at Shiloh. That word Shiloh means rest. So after 7 years of fighting, and some of the tribes got in their land, then the rest of the tribes gathered at Shiloh, and they just took a rest. And when they did that, it upset Joshua. Look at verse 3. Verse 2, rather. There remained among the sons of Israel 7 tribes who had not divided their inheritance. So Joshua said to the sons of Israel, how long will you put off entering to take the possession of the land? God has given you this and you're just putting it off. Why don't you get started? Why don't you do what God has told you to do? And it frustrates people when God has told someone to do something and you keep putting it off. Why do people put stuff off anyway? When they have a mandate, you know, you got a job around a house to do, or you got why do you keep putting stuff off? Is there any particular reason why people do that? I know sometimes when I'm going, First Lady may ask me to do something in the house or whatever, I put it off because we are what? We are procrastinators by trade, I think, by DNA. And so they had put off taking the land that God had given them. How long had they been waiting? Over 400 years, 500 years, they've been waiting, and now they put it off. So Joshua comes up with a plan for them to get the land. He says in verse 4 of chapter 18, provide for yourselves 3 men from each tribe. So we've got 7 tribes, 3 men, 21 men. And what I want them to do, verse 4, that I may send them, that they may arise and walk through the land and write a description of it according to their inheritance. So the men are to go through the land and they are to survey it out. Just 3 men, not everybody, just 3 good men. And this reminds you of when Joshua sent people to spy out Jericho. Sometimes a lot of people will make it's a concept of getting you feed off each other and negatively. So he said, get 3 men, good men, and let them go out to survey the land. So they chose 3 men from each tribe, verse 5, and they shall divide it into 7 portions, and Judah shall stay in the territory to the south, and the house of Joshua shall stay in their territory. So Judah and Joshua have already gotten their land, and so they'll stay where they are. Then he says this in verse 6, and when they come back, I will cast lots for you here before the Lord. Now, that is, I'll roll the dice, thump a coin, whatever you want to do, and see who gets what portion of the land. But we know what? God had already what? Preordained it. What did we say from last week? Proverbs 16:33. Man may roll the dice, but who makes the numbers come up? Yeah. The dice of God are loaded. Now, remember years ago when they talked about loaded dice, you could just roll 7 or 11. I don't know how you did it, but loaded dice. Well, God, you may roll the dice, but God already got the number. His dice are loaded. So you can't, it's not a gamble, because we know from Genesis 49 that God had already forecast all of that. So there is no such thing as luck when it comes to God. You are predestinated, you are glorified, you have been adopted. Everything has already been planned out by God. Verse 7, we are told that the tribes that would get their land, but the Levites have no portion because they were the priests. They were not to get lands, but they were to get cities. 6 cities of refuge and 42 other cities for them to live in and their families. They could get married, but they were not to get in the land because God had said way back when in the book of Genesis chapter 49 that Jacob had 12 sons, but 2 of them were Levi and Simeon. And they had a sister named Diana. Diana was seduced by one of the local pretty boys, so to speak. And she was young and she was seduced. And they felt that their sister was taken advantage of. And so they made a pact with the people that we'll be friends with you. And when the people got circumcised, Simeon and Levi went through the town and killed all the men to avenge their sisters being seduced. And Jacob said, "You are 2 rough boys." And when he was dying on his deathbed in Genesis chapter 49, he said, "You 2 are going to be scattered throughout all of Israel." And of course, we know that the Levites did not get in the land, and we'll see what happened to Simeon a little bit later on. Now, they were still blessed, but I'm just saying he just put that sort of, I don't want to say a curse on them, but things that you do affect your children, don't they? Whether good or bad. Whether good or bad. You know, sometimes we think that only the bad thing affect our children, but good thing affect our children too. If you do good, your children will do good. If you do bad, your children can do bad, or vice versa. So whatever you do will affect your children, whether good or bad. And in this case, the Levites and the Simeons did not get in the land. So verse 8, after Joshua makes that decision how they're going to divide the land, it says the men rose, these 21 men, and went with Joshua as he commanded them, and they walked the land, verse 9. And so the men went and passed through the land and described it by the cities in 7 divisions in a book. And they came to Joshua, and then this is how Joshua divided the land, the rest of the 7 tribes. The Bible says in chapter 18, verse 10, and Joshua cast lots for them before the Lord. So he thumped the coin, if you will, in our vernacular, but actually it was God who was making the decision. And so the first part of the land goes to Benjamin. The remaining 7 lots. Benjamin was the youngest child of Jacob and Rachel. He was Joseph's full brother. We remember him. When he was born, his mother died at birth, didn't she? Yeah. And so Benjamin got the first part of the 7 last slots. And the Bible says this in chapter 11. So it wasn't by the oldest child. Who was the oldest child, by the way? Reuben was the oldest child. So it wasn't by that. It was by who was the child of favorite of the father. So verse 11 says, and the lot of the tribe of the sons of Benjamin came up according to the families. And then God lists all the children of Benjamin and how they got their land. All the children of Benjamin, all the way down to verse 28 of chapter 18. The good thing about that, God is in detail. So your blessings are being recorded in heaven. And when you get to heaven, God's going to pull out his book and show you all the blessings everything you have done, the Bible says, good or bad, is recorded. And so God takes his time and says, Benjamin and his descendants, and Joshua takes time to record every person's blessing. Everything that we do, good or bad, is recorded in heaven. Every thought that we have. Now, the thing about that, if every thought that we had went against us and everything that we did went against us, we'd be in bad shape, wouldn't we? Why doesn't it go against us? Because the blood of Christ. Because the blood of Christ saves us. And so it doesn't go against us because we are under the blood of Christ. But suppose your thoughts went against you. Suppose everything you did went. Now, there are people in this life who are under the first birth, or maybe even the second birth. They record, they remember every bad thing you do. But the Bible says in the book of Isaiah that God removes our sins from the east, removes our sin as far as the east is from the west, and he remembers them no more. He remembers them no more. Can you imagine if you were in heaven and God could remember your sins? Well, he would want to throw you out. So he remembers them no more. And so we have in chapter 18, the lots divided. Okay, in chapter 19, we come back to Levi's brother, Simeon. Now, remember what we said, that those two boys, you go to Genesis chapter 49, verse 7, you see verse 5 to 7, you see this in more detail. We won't go there. But in Simeon is the second tribe that gets their land. And look how their land is distributed. Because of what they did hundreds of years ago, this is how they affect their family. The second lot fell to Simeon, the tribe of the sons of Simeon, according to their families, and their inheritance was in the midst of the inheritance of the sons of Judah. Look at that line. Their inheritance was in the midst. They got their land, but they put their land in the middle of what Judah already had. It's almost like this is my country, and you can have a section of the land in my country. You don't have a country, you just have an acre in my country. So they were sort of minimized. Simeon was like North Carolina, and maybe you had a Fayetteville or Rayford, but they didn't have any power, only because of what their fathers had done. And so Simeon land was caught up in Judah, and they didn't have borders. And you can see what it says about them, not too many people. Look at verse 9. The inheritance of the sons of Simeon was taken from the portion of the sons of Judah, but the share of the sons of Judah was too large for them. So the sons of Simeon received inheritance in the middle of the Judah's inheritance. They didn't receive that much, only because of what happened decades before. What does the Bible say about sins in Numbers 23? What is it? 23? No, 29, 29. Be careful, your sins will find you out. If your sins are not washed in the blood of the Lord, they'll find you out. And so decades later, we see that Simeon, and this happened too in terms of anything, you know, you make bad dealings with your monies and stuff, and it affects your children. So it happens everywhere. So it behooves each one of us to make sure that we try to do the best we can all the time that we can. Now, the third portion then went to Zebulun. There was nothing big about that. So we'll just keep on going. The verse 10, chapter 19 of Joshua. Verse 17, the fourth portion went to Issachar. Nothing too bad about that. Nothing significant. It was just all recorded. The fifth portion, verse 24, went to Asher. And the only thing we know about Asher in the New Testament is, remember when Jesus was born at birth, and his disciples, his mom and his dad took him into the temple, and there was an old man there and an old woman there. And the woman name was Anna, and the Bible says she was from the tribe of Asher. So she knew what tribe she was from. Now, of course, today most Israelis don't know what tribe they're from because of what happened with the destruction of the temple under the Roman Emperor Titus. He destroyed the temples and all the records. So most of them don't know their tribes now, but they will know when Christ comes again, because he said he's going to get 144,000 from all the tribes of Israel. So God knows what the tribes are, even if you don't, if they don't. Chapter 19, verse 32, the sixth lot fell to the sons of Naphtali. Now, the only thing that we know about Naphtali and that land, of course, is go to Matthew chapter 6 and just show you what it mentions in the book of Matthew chapter, not chapter 6, chapter 4. Matthew chapter 4. It talks about how Jesus walked through the lands of Naphtali. It's nothing just historical, but nothing there. Matthew chapter 4. Talk about the light. Where is it? To inaugural. Look at verse 15. Matthew chapter 4, verse 14 and 15. This, Matthew chapter 4, verse 14 and 15, this was to fulfill what was spoken through Isaiah the prophet. The land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali by the way of the sea beyond the Jordan, Galilee of Gentiles, the people who were seated in darkness saw a great light. So Christ came out of the land of Naphtali, and they were sitting in darkness. They saw a great light. And so the sixth lot, entering the number 6 is always a number for who? Man. And so who saw the great light? Man saw the great light in the Naphtali. Now, of course, as we say, observation, interpretation, application. This is history, but you're going to try to apply it to your life. If you're a man and man is 6, hopefully that you see the great light. And of course, Matthew chapter 4, verse 16 say, the people who were sitting in darkness saw a great light. Who's been sitting in darkness? Everybody who's unsaved. And those who were sitting on the land, in the land and the shadow of death, upon them a light dawned. So Christ came out of Naphtali. That's number 6. In chapter 19, verse 12, we find the 7th lot. This is the last one. Goes to Dan. D-A-N. The word Dan means to judge, by the way, like Daniel means to judge. Their land went to them. Now, the two interesting things about Dan was the tribe that thought they didn't get enough of land. They got upset because they said, we're too big and we should have gotten more land than the rest of the people. So they didn't trust God's word. They didn't trust the rolling of the dice. So in verse 47 of chapter 19, the territory of the sons of Dan proceeded beyond them. In other words, it wasn't big enough for them. They didn't think what God planned for them was good enough. Does it sound like anybody you know? What God plans for you is not good enough. You want something else. Well, God has given you the gift, this gift, and I want all of the gifts. I remember some guys, I want every gift out there. You know, use what you got. So Dan was upset. So what happened, they didn't like what they saw. They conquered some more land, and they moved to the north of Israel, all the way to the north. They became the northernmost tribe of Israel. Dan, the northernmost tribe of Israel. You know what happened when they moved north? They were the first tribe to introduce idolatry. They were the first tribe that sort of fell off the wagon. And it happens when you what? When you're not pleased with what God has done for you. They weren't pleased. They said in verse 47, the territory of the sons of Dan preceded Daniel. But the sons of Dan went up and fought with Leshram and captured it. They just weren't satisfied with what God has chosen for you. And that doesn't mean you're sort of content with being mediocre or anything like that. But if God has chosen you to be in this particular area, don't covet somebody in that particular area. Be content with where God has met you. And so Dan, if you look at Judges chapter 18, I think you see where Dan messed up because they were not happy what God had done for them. And there may be somebody who is just not satisfied with what God has done for you. Now, in chapter 19, verse 49, everybody has their land. Judah has his land. Joseph, Ephraim, Manasseh has their land. Caleb has his land. All the tribes got their land. it's missing somebody. So look at verse 49. And when they have finished appropriating the land for the inheritance by its borders, the sons of Israel gave an inheritance in the midst to who? Finally, the leader. He should have been the first one. No, he shouldn't have been. Leaders are what? Servants. Leaders are servants. Someone always asks me, Pastor, why are you always last one to get in line when you have dinner here? Because I'm a servant. I should be the last. I shouldn't be the first. I know people say you fix your plate and all that, but I should not assert my authority. Let me in line first. I remember going somewhere a long time ago. I won't go into too much detail, but these people were there, and the big time preacher was there, and they said, "No, it's one thing for someone to invite you; it's another thing if you invite yourself." you know. And so we are servants. We are servants. And so Joshua is the last person to get his portion of the land. That's how we ought to be in terms of a Christian. If I'm a pastor, I should be a leader, and a leader is really what? A servant. What did Jesus say? I came to lead, or I came to serve? He came to serve. So that's good. He came to serve. So if you're the leader, who's the leader of your house? Then you serve. Yeah, that's what I say. Who's the leader of most houses? Women, aren't they? No, I don't know. Well, the man is the leader. Then he said, whoever the leader serves. I don't know who the leader is. Whoever the leader of your house. If your spouse say, I'm the leader, you say, well, you serve then. So that takes care of Joshua. He gets his land. So all the land has been dispensed. Now, let me just say this too, that just because all the land has been given out, they still had not conquered everything. Remember going back, they still allow the devil into their camp, and they never really overcame some of their problems. Next, in chapter 20 of Joshua, we have the cities of refuge. Now, back in Numbers, God designated 6 cities of refuge. That is when somebody accidentally, unintentionally kills somebody, then they could flee to a city of refuge and they could stay there and be protected. And the person, avenger, so if you kill my brother, then of course, I can avenge his blood, because at that time there was no such thing as police force. So families did the avenging. There was no police force. And oh, by the way, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, that was given so that people would control themselves. Because sometimes the avenger, you kill my brother, I'm gonna kill your brother and your sister. So God said an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. In other words, if someone knocks your eye out, and you can't knock but what? His eye out. You can't knock both his eyes out. So if someone knocks your tooth out, you can't knock his teeth out. So he said an eye, one for one. And so it was for control. It wasn't for revenge. Most people think it's for revenge. It's not for revenge, it's for control. Because you kill my brother, I'm gonna kill your whole family. No, you can only get the brother. Control. And so, and the city of refuge was set up. Now, typically, it shows us how we can go to Christ. It was set up so that people could, when they didn't intentionally sin, they could go for forgiveness. So let's read a little bit about the city of refuge. Chapter 20, verse 1. Then the Lord spoke to Joshua, saying, speak to the sons of Israel, saying, designate the cities of refuge, of which I spoke to you through Moses. So it had already been talked about. The manslayer who kills any person unintentionally, so suppose I'm out chopping wood, and then the axe fly off and hits somebody and kills him. And then I go tell the family, well, you know, you and your brother, we were out chopping wood and the axe flew out and killed him. And they don't believe me. So they take off, they're going to kill me. So I can run to the city of refuge and plead my case. I unintentionally, now if I had intentionally did it, it's another thing. But I didn't mean to do it. So I run to the city of refuge. Now let me see, there were 6 cities of refuge, and they were all within 10 miles of any part of Israel. So wherever you went, you could find a city of refuge within 10 miles. So it wasn't like all in one corner. They were dispersed all over. And so you would just say, you were just close to it, so to speak. So when you do something wrong, how far are you away from forgiveness in the Lord? Are you a long ways away? Are you close? Right, you're just a prayer away. So the idea is when you do something wrong, you don't have to wail and wait. You know how you just talking about, I'm just going to wait on the Lord. No, you ain't got to wait. You just pray, you know, for forgiveness. I want to see what the God's going to say to him. He's already spoken. You know what he's going to say to him. He's already spoken to you. So the idea is that you don't have to wait for forgiveness. All you have to do is ask for it instantaneously. Verse 3 rather, he shall flee to one of these cities and stand at the gate of the city and state his case in the hearing of the elders of the city. Hey, I was out cutting wood and I didn't mean to hit him, and it was accident. It was accident. And he's coming. It was accident. He's coming. You know, the whole family, that's Hatfield and McCoy. Let's kill him. Remember, there was no what? Police force. Do Christians need to have a police force? Yeah. Do Christians need to have a police force? For us. Police force are for who? Lawbreakers. Do Christians need a police force? We're not lawbreakers. Are we? We don't need the police. When we call the police, it's not for us because we don't break the law. We don't need speed limit signs. It's not for us. We don't break the law. So the idea is when you get to heaven, there is no police force. Why? No crooks up there. No crooks in heaven. Can you imagine going to heaven and see some cops? No. Walking on the street of gold. There's no need for a police force. So God's people really don't need a police force if God is in control. And so they didn't have a police force. This was a theocracy. It was God in charge, and everybody, but obviously we need a police force. When's the last time you called a police person to your house? You shouldn't. You and your spouse. Why y'all need the police to separate to do things? Now, if one is acting like unsaved, that's another story. I'm talking about Christians. Okay, move on. Maybe I should ask for my Facebook. When's the last time y'all call a police person? So we don't need a police force. And so the idea is that let God govern us. Did you read about I didn't read it, but I saw it on Facebook. I'm assuming YouTube or something. I'm not sure. About the 4 black ladies that the guy called the police on when they were playing golf. Mm-hmm. You saw that somewhere. Mm-hmm. Wasn't that tragic? Yeah. They were going too slow, and the owner's son was upset because they were moving too slow. And they called the police. Did they arrest them? No, they didn't arrest them. He said they were members of the club. But isn't that the way the thinking these days? Call the police on black folks? Isn't that the thinking these days? Yeah. But no, nothing happened. But the ladies were recording everything as it went along. Nothing happened. But they wouldn't have called on other folk, would they have? I don't think they'd been 4 white women, they would have called the police. No, but those are the days, those are times we live in. Okay, let's move on. Let's move on. Verse 5 of chapter 20. If the avenger of blood pursues him, I saw where Mayor Colvin asked on Facebook. Anyone see that? He's going to be on some committee, and he asked about violence in schools, and he asked for suggestions. Anyone see my suggestion?
No, what you said.
I said you need to hire more black men and vets and put in school, veterans and from college, and prisoners with nonviolent records. Guys who are in jail because of some drug conviction years ago or something, let them help out in schools. Felons, they're not bad people. They got to think out the box. What happens is these politicians can't think out the box. Let some prisoners in who have proven themselves. Just because you got a record of being in jail don't mean you're a bad person. No, but they won't do that. They'll go to Raleigh and come up with some sugar-coated suggestion. Anyway. Anyway. Oh boy. Now, verse 5, if the avenger of the blood pursues him, they shall deliver the manslayer into his hand, because he struck his neighbor without premeditation and did not hate him before. They should not deliver, rather. They should not deliver into his hand if it wasn't premeditated. Now, what happens is when they get to the city of refuge, they can stay there and be safe. But when the high priest dies, verse 6, he shall dwell in the city until he stands before the congregation for judgment. That's the Levites. They talk about it. And they decided he was innocent. Until the high priest, who is the high priest, the death of the one who was the high priest in those days. Then the manslayer shall return to his own city. So the idea is that when the high priest dies, his sins are forgiven. So what's that idea for us for application? When Jesus died on the cross, what happened to our sins? They were forgiven. So that's the idea. That's the application. So you can't always history. This is just history, but the history is not what we're looking at. We're looking at the application. I mean, it's good to know the history, but the Bible is written for application. When Jesus, Jesus was talking to the two men coming on the way of Emmaus after his crucifixion, they said he started with the Old Testament and showed them. And so Jesus showed them himself. That's the application. So many people get interested in the history and they don't see the application. And if you don't see the application, it's just history. You just got mind knowledge. You don't have heart knowledge. So when the high priest dies, our sins are forgiven. And Jesus died on the cross, so our sins are what? Forgiven. And then, of course, in verse 6, verse 7 of chapter 20, verse 7 and 8, we are told the cities that the 6 cities, Kadesh in Galilee, Naphtali and Shechem, Ephraim, Kilroth, verse 8, Bezer in the wilderness, from the tribe of Reuben, Ramoth and Gilead. I'm just reading off the cities, but it was 6 cities, and 6 is the number usually reserved for man, 7 for God, 12 for government, 3 for God too. So 6. And so God has made a way for every man to have refuge. What does the Bible say in John chapter 3, verse 16? For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that whosoever believeth in him shall not perish. So 6 is all inclusive. Every man has a chance for refuge. There's not a person on earth who can't find refuge if he seeks it. If he seeks it, that's the idea. That's the application. So in chapter 20, verse 9, and these were the appointed cities for the sons of Israel, and a stranger. Now underline the word stranger. In every time that God talks about the promised land, one of the first things he says is, don't forget the strangers, the ones who don't look like you, the ones who may not have your same sexual orientation or your race or your gender or your ethnicity, the one who is different. Don't forget them. And so often what happens is that we want to just love people who look like us. And God said, don't forget the stranger. Anybody know any strangers? People who not like you. Yeah, yeah. And usually a stranger is rejected. Don't forget them. One of the first things God told Israel, when you get to the promised land, once you take care of your people, take care of the strangers too. And that's what we got to start doing more. We got to just take care of strangers. You know, we should have a sign, strangers welcome. I think I put that on the strangers welcome. And everybody said, who are strangers? Who are strangers? That's a bad word, actually, because for us, a stranger is what? A strange person. Who wants to be around a strange person? You know? Say what? Aliens, yeah, well, aliens too, the same thing, you know. Aliens, it has the idea of what? Martians with big ears and all that kind of stuff. You know, come across the border, you know, what the president said, rapists and murders and, you know, yeah, we gotta, when you start welcoming strangers in your life, then I know I don't like this city ordinance that the Fayetteville has just put out, and I told the city council this too, when I was down there at one of the prayer meetings, and they asked about this ordinance where you can't give money to people on the side of the street, and I said to them in my own loving way, I said, well, and I said, why? And they said, well, it causes traffic. I said, individuals don't cause traffic. What caused the problem is these groups that get out there and they're con guys, probably got these phony IDs on them. If one guy's standing out there on the corner, he's not causing a traffic problem. It's these guys running across the street like that. But they're professionals. Usually the guy who's standing on the street, he's just standing there. You throw a quarter in. And so what I'm going to do, so I can't hand them dollars. So what I'm going to do, when I see somebody, I'm going to tape a nickel to my dollar bill, and I'm just going to drop it on the ground. And so he can still get it. Can't stop me from doing good. Yeah, but it's those groups that causes problems. And we see them up here at the corner sometimes, don't you? They're the ones, but if I see just one guy standing there, usually he still may be a con guy. I don't know, but it's not. It's those groups that I think that the people sent in from different parts of the country and they run in packs. They're the ones that cause problems. Chapter 20, verse 9. These were the appointed cities of Israel, all the sons of Israel, and for the stranger who sojourns among them, and whosoever kills any person unintentionally may flee there, if you didn't mean to. How many of us don't mean to sin even though we do? God said, I'm here for you. When you sin and don't mean to, God is here for you. And not die by the hand of the devil or the avenger of blood. God is here for us. Chapter 21 is long, but it's not that many things. Only a couple of things, and we'll stop on chapter 21. The Levites. Now we had 6 cities, a refuge, but there were 48 cities that the Levites had in all. 48 cities. So 42 more cities that the Levites didn't own land, but they were sort of like renting these cities from the rest of the tribe. The tribes gave the Levites 48 cities within the whole land for them to raise their families on. And so in chapter 21, we are told how God takes care of the religious people, the religious workers. Look at verse 20, chapter 1, verse 1. Chapter 21, verse 1. Then the heads of the households of the Levites approached Eleazar the priest and Joshua son of Nun and the heads of the households of the tribes of Israel. And they spoke to them in Shiloh. Shiloh means rest. That's where they all sort of had when they come back to the hotel, that was Shiloh. And the Lord commanded through Moses to give us cities to live in with pasture lands for our cattle. So the Levites said, the Lord commanded y'all to help us out since we don't have any land. And so we are told in verse 4 that the Korites got their land. Verse 6, these are the priests now. These are the Levites. They got their land. So the people did give the religious people, the Levites, land. In verse 6, we're told the son of Gershon got their land. In verse 7, Merari got their land. In verse 19, in all, Aaron's sons, they got 13 cities. Now we got 42 in all, so 13 have gotten there. And so they continue. The land is given to the other priests and other tribes. Every tribe gave land to the Levites because the Levites were the ones who was taking care of the temple. They were paying. This is their payment to the temple. They didn't have a police force, but they had a church force, and the Levites were the church force, and they were the ones who took care of their religious things. And so we're not going to read through it. Verse 33, all the cities of Gershon according to the families. Verse 34 of chapter 21, to the families of the sons of Merari. Verse 40, and all these were the cities of the sons of Merari. They got their land. And so what does that tell us? That the people really were concerned about what? Making sure that the Levites were well taken care of. So they were really concerned about what? But the Levites took care of what? The worship. They were concerned. They wanted to make sure that nothing hindered their contact with God. You know, Paul said this when he talks about preaching. He said you should not muzzle the ox that tread out the grain. If someone is taking care of you, your soul, you shouldn't do anything to hinder that person. You know, and so the person who's doing the work, it's almost like, I know teachers don't get as much money as I think they ought to get, because they have the great responsibility for what? Children. Taking care of children. Now, it seems like they should get the most money of anybody, but they don't. Policemen and firemen should get, they start off at $30,000 a year, but compared to other folk, that's nothing. But you get somebody who, working in Silicon Valley getting $50,000 just to put an apple together or something. So it's sad, but you should get teachers but the point is that you need to take care of who takes care of you. That's the idea. Who takes care of you? In this case, the Levites took care of the people, and the people were taking care of the Levites. They made sure that they, and so pastors and churches, if you're getting your life blood from your church, then you should take care of your church. And then verse 45, we'll stop here. Not one of the good promises which the Lord had made to the house of Israel failed. Look at that verse again. Not one of the good promises that God made. If we fail, whose fault is it? It's not God's. Not one. You know, if it would be something that one or two, not one of the good promises which the Lord had made to the house of Israel failed. All, everybody say all. All came to pass. If you don't remember anything else, God is telling you everything I said, you can count on it. Everything I said, you can count on it. Not one of my promises is going to fail. So whatever promise you have, you can count on it. Oh, I forgot to read verse 44. And the Lord gave them rest on every side. So you might want to underline that. Lord God, they rest on everything. We can rest in the Lord on every side. Now, some people can rest when it comes to certain things, but God gave them rest on every side. Every side. Some people go to work, they can rest because they like their co-workers, but they can't work at home because they don't like their spouse, and vice versa. Some people can rest when they go out to certain friends. They can't rest on other friends. But everywhere you are, you should be able to rest in the Lord. It doesn't matter. Okay, we will stop here. Not one. This is Joshua chapter 21, verse 45. Not one of the good promises which the Lord had made to the house of Israel failed. All came to pass. Okay. Thank you for tuning in with us, Facebook and YouTube. If you're watching by Facebook, you can go to my YouTube channel and watch this over and over again. I would suggest that you do so. That's when you're really blessed. Reruns are the best. What are the questions? So y'all stay with me for the questions. All right. Chapter 18, verse 3. Why was Joshua upset? They've been there for 7 years and weren't doing anything. You ever get upset when people don't do something? You tell your kids, you tell your spouse, you tell your pastor, and they don't do nothing? Man, it's been 2 weeks and you haven't cut that grass yet? Yeah, people get upset when you don't do anything. You know, who said this? I think it was Martin Luther King, but I think Jesus started, but Martin Luther King, he said, how long, you know, should we, you know, we shouldn't have to just keep wait and change. Who was it? Sam Cooke, 1960. A change going to come. Woo. All right, you're going way back there. You know that song, Brother Morrison, change got to come? Yes, hit a verse of it real quick.
I was born in a little hood. Lord, I've been living there ever since. But I know a change gonna come. I sung the Christian part of it that was somebody like Clouds of Joy.
Okay. All right. Let's get back. All right. Okay. What was question? Question number 2. What was Joshua's instruction to Israel when what was his instruction about the remaining 7 tribes? He sent out what? 3 from each tribe. And their instruction was to sort of go out and survey it out. Right. Now, how can these instructions help you become better organized? Right. Have a plan. Life is a plan. And if you don't plan to fail, you'll fail to plan. Is that how it goes? Yeah, something like that. Yeah, we all need plans. Organized, and he saw it wasn't working that way, so he sort of narrowed it down. He said, "Man, these tribes just sitting around doing nothing." So he said, "Okay, let me just choose 3 good men from each tribe. Maybe it'll work that way." And so he had to do something. What past event does verse 8 remind you of? This is chapter 19, verse 8. What past event did verse 8 remind you of? Now, see, we got Sister Sandra and Brother Morrissey. We're going to do it for soon. Next week. Verse 8, what past event did verse 8 remind you of when Joshua sent out the spies? Does it remind you of when Moses sent out the spies? Yeah, yeah. So Joshua probably got it from there. True or false? True or false? The land was decided by the roll of the dice. The land divided, the lots were decided by the roll of the dice. False. Yeah, it was basically false because the dice wasn't made the decision. God made the decision. Who received the first and second lots of land? Verse 11 of chapter 18 and verse 1 of chapter 19. Who were the first two? And Simeon, yes. Where was Simeon's lot located? In the middle of Judah. And basically because what? They had done years ago, and they had avenged, they had caused their father Jacob a headache. And Jacob sort of cursed them, so to speak, on his deathbed. What tribe received the fifth lot? Verse 24. Asher. And what person in the New Testament is associated with Asher? Right, Anna, the one who saw Jesus when he was an old lady. It said she had two husbands. Her husband had died or something like that. Yeah, but she was from the tribe of Asher. It's always good to know that. Now, like I said before, if you ask Israelis today, they probably wouldn't know their tribe because the history that has been destroyed through destruction of the temple. But what tribe are you from? You don't know your African tribe, do you? Before you came to America, weren't you from a tribe, your ancestors? We all were. And English wasn't our first language, was it? No. 200 years ago, when our people came over to America, they didn't speak English. So what language did you speak? You've been isolated. We don't know. We don't know. It happens. Who was it? Brother Rucker's son said there are 21 dialects. So Swahili is just a popular one. So it's sort of amazing as you think about it. 200 years ago, you didn't speak English. And you weren't American either. Yeah, I mean, you're more Christian, but I'm just saying in terms of your first birth. Your second birth is where you get your blessings from. You're born again, but your first birth. Okay, but I know mine because I went to ancestry.com. Yeah, I think they got all us just in one little jar. Cause I saw her later on TV. She was the same thing I had. I said she must be my cousin. Took my $100. I tried to get the first lady. She wouldn't let me take hers. But that's another story. Let's move on. Number 7. What tribe? Number 8, rather. What does Matthew chapter 4 say about Naphtali? What comes out of Naphtali? Christ, the light. The light comes out of that tribe. So this tribe, even though it seems like it's unimportant, out of this tribe came the light of the world. Yeah, so it doesn't matter. Your light came from Naphtali, the light of the world. And that's where Jesus comes out of. Question number 9. For those who are watching, you go to New Life Bible Church INC and download the questions. We have them on our Facebook page and our YouTube page. Question number 9. Who received the 7th lot? Verse 47. Dan. The word Dan means judge. And what happened? Look at Judges chapter 18, verse 30. That's the only verse I want to turn to. Judges chapter 18, verse 30. What does it say about Dan? Dan was not satisfied with their portion. They thought they deserved more. And so They went to the north and they got more land. But what happened? Chapter 18, verse 30. It says, the sons of Dan set up for themselves a graven image. They started false worshiping because they didn't think God had given them the right proportion. And so you got to trust God. Yeah, but that was their downfall. You don't want to be a Danite, do you? God is a judge, and they did not let God judge. They judged themselves. God said, this is your portion. They said, no, we want something else. Never satisfied. You got some, some people like that, never satisfied. By the way, what does a real rich person want? To be richer. Never satisfied. What does a real poor person want? Never satisfied. Where are we? Which one? Who received the last portion of land? Verse 4. Who received the last portion of everybody? Joshua. If you were in charge, would he ever receive the last or the first? You would have given him the first. I'm putting you on the Pastor Appreciation Committee. The test. Who else would see the first? Just Miss Member, what would Joshua got? You too. Nah, he's a servant. He should. What did Jesus say when? Oh, that's right. Okay, I see that. Yeah, because Jesus, when Peter was going to wash Jesus, yeah, when Jesus was going to wash Peter's feet, and Peter said no, and Jesus washed the disciples' feet. That's the servant. That's the servant. And we should do that. And ministers should. As a pastor, I think of that often. I don't want to, people say you're passing on it, but you don't want to put it in your head. It's not. It's just a servant. I'm not a pastor in that sense, but you have to play the role. But just a servant. What was the purpose of the city of refuge? Unintentional sins. Yeah, and that's for us too. And how many cities of refuge were there? 6 that we could go there, and 6 is represent. To you, what do the cities of refuge represent to you? Covered by the blood. Forgiveness. Yeah. What? Safe place. Yeah. What do we have in our modern day? We call cities of refuge. We call them sanctuary cities now, don't we? Sanctuary cities. Sanctuary cities where aliens go. Chapter 14, verse 21. What did the Levites request? Verse 21. Chapter 21. What did the Levites request? Right, they request that what God had told the rest of the people, that we were to get cities for our families too, because Levites had families too. The priests had family; they could marry. It wasn't like Catholicism where the priests, well, some of them can marry now, but they could marry and raise families. So how were they going to get their support? And so they could have cities which they could live in, and also suburban areas, because it said pasture for land. So it was a responsibility of the people to take care of the religious workers, because the religious workers took care of their souls. Verse chapter number 15. How did the Levites obtain rights to the cities? I just said that. How? Each tribe gave them some, and so everybody should give according to how you've been blessed. How many cities did the priests receive? Verse 19, the priests received 13, and of course the rest. Question number 17, Levites were dispersed in blank cities. How many cities in all? 48. 6 the 6 refugee cities and cities of refuge rather, and 42 other cities. They were diverse in 48 cities. That's in Genesis chapter 49, verse 7. Question number 18, chapter 21, verse 44. It says, victory finally came. How was it accomplished? Right. Verse 40 said the Lord gave them the rest on every side. Look at, somebody read Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 22. Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 22. Interesting scripture. How does God do it? Deuteronomy 7, 22. Real quickly. It says 7:22. How was it accomplished? The Lord your God will clear away these nations. How? Before you, little by little. God may not give you victory overnight. It may not happen in the next 5 minutes. It may not happen all year. But it's going to happen. It's little by little. I have learned that. It's little by little. When I look back, I see, man, the progress. But it wasn't, I always wanted victory win. Now, it was little by little. So some people want to go to the altar and all of a sudden they're cured. And it could happen, but it could also happen little by little. And verse 45, chapter 21, and we'll stop on this one. If we fail, whose fault is it? Why it's not God's fault? Because God has done everything he said he would do, didn't he? All right. Okay. All right. We'll stop here. God bless you. God bless you. God bless you. God bless you. May heaven smile upon you. All right. Thank you, brother Miriam, for not